This is going to be a demonstration about how to blend acrylic paint. There are essentially 4 different techniques that I'm going to show you. For everything you need: fresh water, paper towels, pencil, a couple of flat brushes. You might could get by with a round, perhaps, in some of this, but kind of some small to medium sized flats. Okay. You might could just get by with 2, and that would be fine. But you probably definitely need 2 and not just 1. Okay. Alright, so got a pencil, and I got 2 pieces of paper. Got 1 piece of paper that's about 7 inches by 5 inches, so you can have something like that roughly. Another small piece of paper that's basically about 3 inches by 3 inches, roughly. Okay. Alright, so then of course I got my paints with my top. Okay. Alright, so we're just going to be using white and black on this. White's looking a little rough there, it's getting a little old, but again, that's just what's on top. Now these paints have been sitting for a little while. At this point, it might be a good idea for me to start spraying these paints, just because the longer they stay out, the more they're going to start to dry. Now, if you have one of these, that works really good. If you have something where you can, kind of squirt bottle, or you can even flick water on there. Just try not to get it soaked, but they'll help retain some of the moisture while they sit out while you paint. And then sometimes you might want to spray a little bit of water or flick a little water on it when you go to cover them and put them up. And that'll keep, reabsorb some of that moisture. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to set this out aside for a second. And I'm going to focus on this and divide it up. Since we're going to show 4 different techniques, we're going to divide this up into 4 sections. And I'm just kind of roughly using the pencil here. I'm not measuring. Okay. Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be measured, doesn't have to be straight lines perfectly. Okay, this is just just a demonstration. Okay, we're just trying to divide these areas up. All right, so I'm going to grab one of my flats. And at this point, I'm going to start toning the ground. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do for these areas, I'm actually going to use a gray, and for this area, I'm going to use a black. Okay. So I'm going to find an area of my palette that's I can mix on that's not got any wet paint on it. In this area I can mix on. So I'm going to take some of this black, and it's feeling, I don't know, it might have spread okay, but to make it spread better, I might can add a little bit of water to it, just to thin it a little bit, just to make it spread a little easier. And I'm going to use black on this one. Set this one aside for a second. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to paint all the way to the edge. I'm going to leave like a white margin all the way around the edge of this. So like a border, like a white border or margin. Now since I'm putting this on thin, it's covering easy. It's also going on kind of transparent. So I am going to need to coat this twice. But acrylics dry really fast. Okay. So I can help then speed that up by fanning it off. Pretty dry. All right, now this isn't really dry, so I don't want to remove part of that while it's still kind of setting up. So I gotta be careful about how much I brush back and forth with the second coat because I haven't let this dry for very long. Acrylics will do that. You'll kind of lift up an area underneath. You'll re-wet it if you're not careful. Although generally acrylics don't re-wet, but when it's fairly fresh, it can happen. Okay, so that's pretty thin. It's not really thick. It just took 2 thin coats to cover that. I don't want you to have to use a lot of your paints in order to get that nice and covered. Okay. So that works pretty good. And if you notice with acrylics, they do have a bit of a shine or a gloss to it. It's kind of wet, but even when it dries, still has a little bit of a sheen to it. That's a lot different than temper paint. Temper paint has a very matte, dull finish to it, whereas the acrylics have a very fairly shiny, not glossy, but a sheen. Okay, so we'll set that aside now, and I'm going to mix now a gray. So I'm going to take some of my black. I'm going to say about that much should do it. I'm going to take some white. Just going to grab here from the edge. If I grab a couple of those colors right there at the edge, it'll be okay. Just mix that in. Looks like I'm turn out with a pretty dark gray there. So I'm going to need a little more white. So maybe I won't mix in all that because I want maybe something a little lighter. Okay, I feel pretty good about that. That's about a medium gray there. Okay. Now what I want to do, maybe I'll grab some of that because I think I'm going to need more paint. Okay, that'll work. So now I'm going to do basically what I did over here. Maybe I'll add a little water to it. Just because I want it to spread. Put on, I think, 2 thin coats like I did before, perhaps. And I won't have to use much paint. Okay. So now, just like over there, I'm going to leave a margin. Now this looks pretty streaky because, again, I'm using fairly thin. That's okay. My second coat will fill in the gaps. Okay, now that should be about dry enough where I can put my second coat. But I want to fan this off just a little bit just to make sure. This actually turned out to be a pretty dark gray. Up here. Trying to be sparing on my paint here. Alright, so that covers it. Okay, so I've toned the ground. All with a fairly dark gray, not quite black though. I really did want a mid-value gray, so at least now I've got everything covered. Maybe I can go back and really refine and get the gray that I really wanted. Just put another thin coat on top. Okay. It's a bit lighter. It's drying a little darker though. Could be that dark gray underneath coming through. I'm putting on so thin. Plus, paint dry looks the way it looks wet versus the way it looks dry can be different. In terms of how light or dark it is. Okay, feel a little better about that. Paper's starting to buckle on me a little bit. Poster board is really pretty good though. Oh, I didn't mention it before. You know, poster board has kind of a matte side and then kind of a glossy side. For this, it doesn't matter which side you use. But I can say if you're starting a painting where you're having to draw with pencil, it's going to work a lot better on the matte side versus glossy side. This is a piece of poster board. This is the glossy side. This is the matte side. And you see I've kind of put a little pencil in there. Pencil marks really good on that, and then it erases pretty well too on the matte side. Okay. On the glossy side, kind of goes down a little hard and it erases a little harder because it wants to smudge or smear. Did pretty good there, but a lot of times you'll find kind of it just doesn't work as well on a glossy surface. Just like as if you've ever tried to use pencil on a sheet of magazine paper where it's real glossy, it does not work. So anyway, all right. So we're going to set this aside for a while. We're going to save that for last. Okay. All right. So from here, actually I'm going to turn this way and then work on it this way, so that way we've got more room to work on. Kind of going from, we're essentially going to be kind of creating a value scale of sorts for our first one, just to kind of show like a blend. So this is kind of a, if you got enough values side by side, you do get the idea of a gradient or a blend. But these aren't really blended because they have this sort of edge there. And that doesn't really show a blend. It shows a gradient, but it's not really a blend. So if you got enough of these and they're close enough, so if you had another value in between these, like a value that was like in between the 2 and the 3, then after a while you get enough of those values like that, even if they're not truly, you can still see an edge, it still could start to take on the look of an actual, kind of a visual kind of a blend. So anyway, so our first thing we're going to do is kind of like that, okay? All right, so I think for this I actually am going to use a round for this, okay? Because I do want kind of a textured edge on this, and rather than just using something like a flat. Now this has acrylic on it, and I don't really want to wash it right now. So for the meantime, I need to stick this in the water so that the paint doesn't dry on the brush. Okay, anytime you got acrylic on the brush, you either need to go and wash it off or just stick it in the water momentarily until you get around to it. Okay? Alright, so um, so the first thing we're going to do, there's a clean brush, is I'm going to use white to actually put in a row of white. And then I'm going to come down and then make a gray and so forth as I come down. So I'm going to make these rows, kind of like in the value scale. So instead of wiping back and forth though, I'm actually going to put marks down at a diagonal, and I'll explain why once we get going. So I'm going to take a little bit of white, and then I'm going to create this kind of diagonal marks. Now notice this rough edge. I could have gone back and forth and created like a hard straight edge, kind of like that, but I like this kind of rough edge. It's going to kind of give me more of a visual look of a blend after doing that. Those hard edges, that kind of softens the edge. Okay, a hard edge will stand out more than a soft edge, like that hard edge. Okay, so it came out a little transparent. I'll let that dry a little bit. Put another little bit of white on top, just to really get that kind of opaque. One of the main things I'm going for is this kind of rough edge, which kind of creates kind of a soft edge, kind of softer. As you can see there, kind of has these little kind of rough kind of edge, which kind of softens it up. Okay, versus looking at this kind of an edge, which is very crisp and kind of hard. Okay, there's a reason for that. It's going to give it the look of a blend. Okay, so now I'm going to start making my grays. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some white, try to get some without getting anything on it, and I'm going to take just a teeny tiny little speck of black, put on there because I want to make a light gray. I'm going to make a really light gray. Okay, that might be enough. Now I'm going to put this right underneath. I want to overlap the white a little bit. I don't want to leave a gap in between. Okay, so that's my next value. Now if I got any of that left, I can take some more black, add to that. Don't want it to get too dark too quick though. That's not going to be enough paint. I can add a little more white to it. Now hopefully this is going to be just a little bit darker. It is. I don't want a sudden shift. I want like a gradual change in value. If I do this sudden shift in value, then it's going to stand out. I want it to be a gradual, so there's a gradient. Okay, change from one value to the next. Now I have to, when looking at this, if I got too sudden of a shift, and it looks like this value might be a little bit too dark of shift from that white, let's compare this, and I can tell by squinting my eyes at it. These almost kind of blend together, whereas these kind of really stand out. I see an edge there, so I might need to go back and lighten that one. And you may need to do this as you go. Just to adjust your values. Still looking a little dark in comparison. Now it looks a lot better. Now when I squint my eyes, I see an edge here and here. So it looks like this value really does sit in between those two values. Okay. Alright, so now I need to make the next value after this one. So I'll just continue that process. And actually the value that's on there actually doesn't look half bad. So remember, I was looking for like a mid-value when I did this gray underneath. So I think I did pretty good actually when I did that. Maybe just went a little too dark maybe. got different gray in my brush right there. Okay. So now we need to go a little darker than that. Okay. And dry that and see how that looks. So again, how something looks wet versus how it looks dry can change. Now if I squint my eyes at it, I can see about equally those edges, so I know I'm doing pretty good as far as making this gradual change from one another. There's no sudden shifts between the values. And I'm just keep working with this same mixture. I'm just kind of adding black to it each time. Now I don't know, I might end up getting to black before I get all the way to the bottom here. We'll see. It's looking like my next one might need to be black. So maybe it'd been nice if I had some other values in here to where I didn't get so dark so quick. But you see a fairly good gradient there. Just don't see as much of a change in value down here as I see up here. So maybe I changed values a little too quick up there. So I could try to work back in the other direction a little bit. I'm seeing a little bit more of an edge there. Now what that means, I gotta lighten up each one after that. Now what's amazing is supposedly the human eye can see 900 different shades of gray. And right here, it's difficult just making 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different shades of gray. Yeah, I think maybe I got too dark with this one. I think that was my culprit. Now that feels a little better now. At least now I can see pretty much an edge all the way down. These two do kind of blend together, but I see it better than what the camera shows. So if you had to go back and adjust, that's what you can do. And getting better about putting values in places as you go is something that becomes a necessary skill. Okay? So that edge right there does help give sort of the look of a blend. Okay? So now for the next one, it's going to be pretty difficult in a sense that we're going to be doing the same thing, except we are actually going to try to blend the paint on the surface while it's still wet. Try to blend that edge, okay? But before we do that, we're going to start on a technique down here where we actually use water. And it's called a glaze, okay? But we're going to do that, then let it dry, and then we're going to come back to it, okay? So what I'm going to do is I actually want to probably go back to my flat. And I'm going to get some black, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with regular black, opaque black. I'm not putting a lot of paint on my brush. I'm just going to start across the bottom edge of this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush in a little bit of water, and I'm going to start to thin down the paint that's on the brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the edge of where I just painted. I'm just barely overlapping the edge, going back and forth. I need to make sure to do that before it dries on me too quick. So I'm trying to blend that edge. Okay, now I'm going to get a little more water. And I'm going to go along the edge of that. Might have got a little too much water. If it did, I just patted on a little bit of paper towel right there and kind of soak that up. Brush is kind of a mop. I'm just going to keep sort of spreading this out, making it thinner and thinner with water. Maybe try to get a little less water this time. Now what I'm going to do, I got a lot of water on there. I really am going to try to stamp out what's left on the brush. See if I can sort of mop that up. I'm going to try to spread this kind of even now. You can see just how thin that is. How it keeps getting thinner and thinner. Now I'm just going to stop right there. Okay, I've already faded the black out right there. Now it does look a little rough, but you sort of start to see a blend going on. And while all it's doing is the paint's getting thinner and thinner and letting the gray underneath, so it's becoming more and more transparent. The paint's been replaced with water, and then therefore it's thinning it out. So it's becoming more like, almost like watercolor. So acrylics are very versatile, that you could thin it down basically consistent of like watercolor. Okay, and you start to see that dry pretty quickly. So now you can really sort of see a gradient going on there. Okay, so we're going to let that dry and we're going to work up here now. I'm going to switch back to my round for this. Okay, now we're going to basically do this again. So for this time, we're going to try to blend these together as we go down. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit of white. Now, I have to do this pretty quick. I can only do it in small amounts because the paint dries so fast. So now I've got quite a bit of white on there. Now quickly I need to make the next value. Actually, I'm going to use some of what was already on there. Now I don't know if that white's still quite wet. But what I want to do now is work up into that white that was there. And just barely touch the edge. and just kind of work it into it. Now if I have to, I can go back and get some more white, which I think I'm going to do. I'm going to clean this off real quick. And see if I can work back down into that while it's still wet. Alright, now I'm going to try to work these two together where they touch. And hopefully I can get the two to start to blend together. So you see there's just a bunch of little touches going on there. And really what is sometimes called is stitching it together. So hopefully I still got some of this still kind of wet. I can go back over here. And now you can really see those two kind of blended together versus right there. Now I need to continue doing this really quickly if I want to keep blending this together. The only way I can really make this work is if the two are still wet. I know that's going to be dry by the time I get to it, so I have to repaint it. This is where you almost need both mixtures mixed at the same time, so that way you can go back and forth between the two mixtures. Get some of that light mixture off, get some of this dark mixture. Too dark. Really light touches. And you really got, I mean, it's really challenging. You gotta stay on top of it. Okay. So I started to lose that a little bit because I started to paint back up into that some. So I might have to take a little white. So every time I'm using very little paint. Hopefully trying to blend in the paint that's still wet. Okay, starting to lose it right there a little bit. Okay. Whew. It's a lot of work. So now this is probably drawing me. Probably gonna have to need more space here to put all my stuff. So now I really almost need to remix that. I can even spray a little bit of water on here, which can really help. Kind of put a little moisture back into the paint just so it doesn't dry on me because this is so thin. So I can hit a little bit of the water on my brush and add to it as I go. Let's see if I can remix, reapply that. It's probably a little too dark. There we go. And so I make this darker value. Let's see if I can blend those together. I probably got a little too dark on that. Probably should be more like that right there. Let's see, that really helps. When I got the water on there, and I put that in there just kind of where I can put my brush on a little bit and add to it, and it just makes the paint stay wet that much longer. So I can really work it on the surface to where then it goes in together. And I'm working with such a minuscule amount of paint. I do not have hardly much paint on this brush. If you look right there, when I do that on this plate, you can see how much paint is coming off of that. Hardly any at all. So when I do this, I'm working with little to no paint. A trace amount of paint. If you're using a lot of paint expecting big things to happen, it just don't work that way. I mean, if you really want to smooth things out, probably getting a little too dark there, but I'm trying to speed things up a little bit. Now, if you find things just aren't working out, you can just stop, rest, regather yourself, let it dry, then get back to it. This is something where it just really takes working with it over time to really get a feel for how to make it work. So you see here, I have like kind of a light and a dark. The next dark and the dark that was before it. If I find it's getting a little too dry, I can hit a little bit of that water right there, put it onto the brush. Now I can see a little bit of that. Don't like that. Get rid of that edge right there. So that's the main thing, you don't want to see an edge. Alright, so we're ready for the next value. I need to add a little bit of water to that if it's getting a little dry. Value shift was a little sudden right there. Maybe I can go back. See, I'm running out of water on there, so I'm going to spray a little bit more on there. Not on the paint itself, but kind of to the edge, so that way I can kind of hit my brush in it. If I dip my brush into my water, I'll probably get too much water. Okay, so I really need to start getting the black now at this point. I seem to be stuck in this kind of middle gray. Guess it's much easier to create a gradual grays this way than that way. Keep making mixtures in between, making for a much more subtle change in values, I guess. Let me go ahead and see if I can get that pretty dark. I'm mixing it in with the value that's before. See if I can mix out the edge. Now let's see if I can get a black on this. I'll mix it in. Part of the value that was before it. See if I can mix those two together. So you can see how that blended. So to recap, pretty much I had the value that was, on top mixed. And then I made the value underneath it, and then I mixed the two together for what was in between it. Okay? So if I had kind of a lighter value before this one, so I painted that one first, and I paint that one next. Then I blend these two together to get something in between it. So I put another value in between that then helped in terms of getting more, just another value in between, rather than just mixing those two values on the paper. I mixed another value in between and put in between those and mixed the two together, if that makes sense. Okay, so it's like as if I painted this and then I painted this, right? So I had this on here. Well, let's just say I have this on here, and I have this on here. Then I mix something that was in between those by mixing those two together, and then paint the two together. Okay, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. So this is plenty dry enough now. So now I'm going to go back in a reverse direction. Okay, I already got kind of a middle gray. I got black down here. So I'm going to do something with kind of a white up here. Okay, and then kind of do a wash back in this direction. Okay, so I'm clean. Well, put that in there. So I'm going to go back to my flat. So I'm going to take some of my white. So I'm being pretty careful not to use too much paint as I'm doing this. And so I'm just kind of hitting right at the edge again to always get my paint. Okay. So I need some clean white. And just to show, I mean, if I pull this back a little bit, you can see there's clean paint underneath there. And I can actually use probably that even and kind of mix into the paint. It's not really going to change my color. It's not like going to yellow or turn yellow in my paint of the white. It might turn a little bit off white. Okay, now, the thing is I don't really have clean water, but it'll be okay. So right now I don't want to, of course, add water to this right now. I want to go pure paint, okay, right across the top of this. I want to be just opaque white paint. Now I'm going to put just a touch of water around the tip of this. And I'm going to brush back and forth before that starts to dry. So I want to blend that edge right there. I'm going to add a little more water to it. It's a little hard to control. Oh, you can see that edge right there. I really don't like that edge showing up right there. So I'd have to go back because that paint, dries fast. See if I can get rid of that edge. It's done dried up on me. That's what I'm talking about. If you ever happens to, or if you got like a skin of paint and it sort of lifts off. Okay, so now I'm going to have to go back and touch this up. But that's fine. This is sort of an initial trial. So I'm going to dip my brush into a little bit more water. I always go back and refine it. So now I've thinned it down even more. So I got a little too much water on there and I've really thinned it down. So I'm going to try to take off what's left on the brush and just spread what's on there. See if I can sort of spread out kind of evenly. Okay, so that water is really kind of drying up on me. So it's not the neatest look in the world, but you start to see the point. How, you know, a glaze, just how that works. And let's see if I can get some of this paint off, get a little just pure water. See if I can get rid of that edge right there. Okay, so that worked a little bit. You can actually get a really smooth look this way. Generally this is a lot larger doing it this way than what I would normally do. But, you can work fairly large and a big area and do this. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start to do this one. Then I'm going to come back to this and then show you how you could then smooth this out a little further by using then gray on that as well. Okay, so we're going to do something over here called a dry brush. Okay, and we're actually going to do it fairly large too, kind of like that. So now that we still have white on the brush, I'm just going to use white on this. Now, I really do need my brush to be fairly dry. So let me just wipe this off to get any moisture off of it. And I don't want too much paint on the brush, okay, because this is going to be called a dry brush, okay. So I'm going to go across here, pure white. Then as I come down, you're going to see gaps start to appear. And that's because there's very little paint on the brush. And now we've done this before in temper paint. And you get an interesting look this way. And as I come down, I have less paint on the brush. Now it's almost like I'm really trying to scrub and almost find little specks of paint still left on the brush. There's so little on there. I'm not being too hard with the brush as I come down with that. So, it's hard to control. You'll get stuff like that, but that's okay sometimes. You want that look, kind of a random rough texture look, but you can look how even still you could make that look even, go back and touch this up. And so that made a really nice gradient or a blend, okay? So now let's do it with black. I'll wash my brush off, get it nice and dry. Maybe got a little too much black. Now I'm going to go back with black. Go in the opposite direction. A little too much black on there. So that's fine. I can go back with gray and work that back out, or even go back with white again. Okay. So let's do a gray over here now. Okay. So, believe it or not, I still have some of that gray left over. I'm going to attempt to do a glaze on this in the middle. So I need to Add a little water to it first. I'm going to go opaque with it in the middle. So let's see if I can, how this will look. Okay, a little too much paint on. I'm going to take some of that paint off. Add water to it. Wipe off any paint, maybe add a little water. Just want it really thin right here. Okay. Let that dry. Now let's see if I can do some gray over here. I want it dry, so I'm going to wipe that off. Get it fairly dry. Get some of this gray over here. Let me dry brush some gray on here. Okay, so you can do it with any value, any color. I remember I didn't like that white too much on this side or that side. The brush might be a little wet. It's not really dry brushing so much. It's more like mixing. It's a little too wet. See that shine on it. So it's not really dry brushing. It's more like kind of glazing at this point. So true dry brush, you want that kind of rough look. That's starting to kind of blend in a little too much because my brush is still a little too wet. So I'm going to get some opaque white put on here. Come down. Take some of that paint off. Put a little water on it. Take some of that paint off. Add a little water to it. A little too much water. There we go. Let that dry. See how it's kind of a little rough, but it's pretty smooth. It's There's that glaze. I mean, you really can get that fairly smooth. You can start to see how this ended up kind of looking like that side. So let me try that white again. My brush is still wet. We're getting that dry brush look now. So that just gives a whole different visual quality, that texture versus this texture, kind of smooth texture, depending on what you're going for. Okay, so those are 4 very different looks, but ways in which you can create a blend. Okay, and it's not easy. It's pretty trying, tedious work, but if you continue to work with it, I mean, you can get results. Okay, all right, and I'll just kind of demonstrate this on a separate video.